Good evening. More serious allegations about EQC assessors, including nepotism, shonky scoping and threats of blacklisting. Is this all further evidence of the need for an independent government inquiry into this organisation? Lynched starts right now. Good evening, thanks so much for your company tonight. Well, there are more serious allegations that EQC assessors were being hired because of family connections, deliberately removing agreed repairs from scopes and threatening to blacklist customers who have worked with the repair advocates. Now, all of this, of course, follows an investigation by the Christchurch Press. So what should happen now? Well, Labour is calling for an independent inquiry, and Labour's Megan Woods is with us. Good evening.
Good evening, Chris.
What would an independent inquiry actually achieve?
Well, an independent inquiry would differ from the reviews that we've already had so far that the Minister keeps referring to, in that it wouldn't be responsible to the Minister. It wouldn't be answerable to the Minister. It would, something like a Royal Commission, for example, is actually answerable to Parliament, not to an individual Minister. And I think that's a really critical distinction, that we have to get that level of independence into it, and that we have to, I mean, there's so many questions that need to be addressed.
You're not wrong there, but I wonder though, what would be the point of a Royal Commission of Inquiry? Because in a way, we know that there's been issues with EQC. We know there have been issues with insurance companies. We know this. Why do we need an echo chamber to essentially repeat the awfulness that has gone on within this organisation, some would say?
Sure, and I think that's a really good question, Chris. The reason why we simply must have it, if we put aside the fact that we've got to address the individual pain that people are going through, and that we have to find out the systemic problems that are there for Canterburyans whose homes have been damaged, but importantly for me as well, that New Zealand will have another disaster at some point in the future, and we have to ensure that we learn from Canterbury, that we find out what has gone wrong, what's gone well, and that we actually put in place a system that is much more capable of dealing with the situation when we come to this again, and a Royal Commission is the perfect body to do that.
Why have you pounced on this now? Because this has been in the Christchurch Press now for many months. We've known about the issues of family connections. In a way, this isn't new. The only new aspect I can think of, not that that's just to discount it, is the fact this made national television last night.
Well, actually, several weeks ago, probably a month or so ago now, Andrew Little actually called for an independent inquiry. So that this isn't just come up because there was a television show last night. This is something we've been thinking about for a long period of time. It was in our policy at the last election that we did have to have an independent review of EQC. I think that we're just seeing the layering upon layering upon layering of questions about how EQC has operated. Look, we've got to draw a line in the sand, and we need to get answers, and we can't have a Minister that sits on the sideline. We really have to provide those answers.
Speaking of Earthquake Recovery Minister, I want to bring up a statement he sent CTV News early this morning, and it reads this, and I want to get you to respond. It reads, the subject of recent coverage of complaints to EQC is already the focus of an employment investigation. And Earthquake Recovery Minister says it's not warranted. As you'll see on the screen there, warranties apply to earthquake repair work, as they do to all building work in New Zealand, as set out under the Building Act. Also, there are numerous robust avenues for review and appeal of the standards and scope of the earthquake building repairs. He goes on to say regular customer audits undertaken by EQC and other insurers have shown generally high levels of satisfaction, but if properly owners are dissatisfied, there are existing remedies available to them. So he is essentially completely ruling out any need for inquiries. He's right in a way though, isn't it? Because there are things residents can do, but you would say it's putting too much onus back on the residents.
It is, and one of the problems that we have is we have no idea what the scale is here. We don't know that we've spent nearly $12 billion through EQC on earthquake repairs to date. We don't know what the scale of unease and the questions that people have there. What a Royal Commission could do is actually look at this systemically and identify where the problems are likely to be, which actually will end up costing a lot less than having to go back and do individual reviews of people. The Minister is saying that we can deal with this on a case-by-case basis. The time for that is over.
I mean, how many cases do you need?
Well, exactly. They're just how bad do things have to get around here before we can have an inquiry. That we've got to look at this systemically. We've got to look at the systemic failings that have happened there. One, so we can help the people that are stuck in this mess that desperately want to get on with their lives, but as I said earlier, also so we can learn from this and we can make sure we don't replicate this again.
What I thought was quite telling, though, on a Third Degree last night was Ian Simpson's reaction. And lawyer Duncan Webb, who we'll have in the studio next on moments away in the program, made the comparison or made the suggestion that it seems like this organisation just doesn't understand the culture that it's working in, the environment it's been working in. It's head in the sand mentality. And after watching last night, I wonder what you thought.
Well, I think that as a group of MPs, my colleagues and I, that we've been saying for a number of years that the way in which people are treated at EQC, individual claimants when they go through it, is actually pretty terrible on occasion. Some people have had some terrible experiences in there. This is no surprise. This is stuff the Minister has known about for years, and it's time to act now.
We've got to take a break. When we return, we'll discuss some of the so-called resolutions and how EQC is sorting this out. Plus, lawyer Duncan Webb also joins us on the program. Welcome back to the program. Serious allegations about EQC assessors, including nepotism, shonky scoping and threats of blacklisting. Is this all further evidence of the need for an independent inquiry into the organisation? Labour's Megan Woods is with us, and shortly lawyer Duncan Webb will join me in the studio. Megan, let's talk about what EQC says it's going to do to fix the problems of shonky work. And I want to get your thoughts on this. EQC says it's putting together a team of 35 staff to deal with the repairs. The head of Canterbury Customer Services said the team will be in place by the end of October. Is that good enough? It's a start, isn't it, or not?
Well, I think for individuals that can get one of these 35 assessors to come and have a look at their work at their home and know about their house, it will be a good thing for those individuals. But this is the problem. The EQC is still thinking about this in a case-by-case basis. It's not willing to think about the broader questions about how we've got into this situation, that after all this money and all these repairs that we've done, we're now having to put the fix-up plan in place, that we're having to put 35 assessors. We need to do both. We certainly need people that will go and look at the situations as they've occurred and go and look at people's houses and look at their foundations and check that their homes are safe for them to be living in. But that doesn't rule out the need for us to have an independent inquiry.
Okay, so we've already heard from that statement Jerry Brownlee has ruled out an inquiry. In your view then, is Jerry Brownlee out of his depth?
Well, I think the Minister is accountable. The buck stops with Jerry Brownlee on this. He is the Minister that is responsible for EQC, and I think that he needs to stand up and be counted on this and show some leadership to the people of Canterbury and get to the bottom of this. There's too many questions there that are unanswered.
And in your view, the only way to achieve this is by a Royal Commission of Inquiry?
We certainly need an inquiry, and it needs to be independent and not at the beck and call of the Minister.
Megan Woods, appreciate your time. We'll sort of come. Lawyer Duncan Webb weighs in on the issue. That's next. Christchurch lawyer Duncan Webb says it's not only EQC repairs that are defective. He says the Earthquake Commission system is broken too. The failures flow from cultural and institutional flaws that have flourished largely unabated. His words. And Duncan Webb is with us now. Good evening to you.
How are you?
In a statement Jerry Brownlee put out to CTV, he says regular customer audits undertaken by EQC and other insurers have shown generally high levels of satisfaction. So are you overplaying this? Because you've been highly critical of the way EQC has been in the last few months at least.
Well, every day I deal with people who have issues with insurers and with EQC, and I deal with all of those organisations, and they all have their flaws, but EQC is by far the worst. They are very difficult to deal with. Refuse to engage, they delay, and frankly, I deal with organisations of all levels, and that is one of the worst I've ever had to deal with. I have no doubt about it.
It's strange, isn't it? Because we're talking about a government agency that, for better or worse, is supposed to work for the people, but you would say the exact opposite.
Oh yeah, look, that's exactly right. It's exactly the organisation that New Zealanders should be able to trust, to protect them, to look after them, and to be the safety net in exactly this situation. And what I see is that, you know, people have problems with their insurers, but the insurers have a commercial imperative to settle their claims. And EQC is actually the bottleneck. It is still handing over claims to insurers 5 years after the first event, and that is frankly appalling.
I want to quote you from what you said in the press a couple of weeks ago. The failures flow from cultural, I think you said impacts, that have flourished largely unabated. That appeared to be illustrated last night on the Third Degree program when, in my view, the CEO would not answer some very interesting questions.
Yeah, look, and part of that, if I can touch on what I think that culture is the culture of a government department that isn't answerable in law. The sense that people should be grateful for what EQC gives them, and that they'll get round to them when they see fit and proper. And that's a bureaucratic approach which is entirely inappropriate, when in fact they should be the intervener of very first resort. The EQC claims, especially those overcap claims, should have been resolved very quickly so that the insurers could get on and do their job. And of course now the insurers have the terrible job of having people 5 years after the event and it's the first time they've seen them. No wonder homeowners are angry at insurers, but look, half of that problem, and a great deal more than half, is due to EQC's delays.
You've said there should have been a ministerial oversight that has been the focus. Well, no, sorry, you've said it's been the focus of money and saving.
Yeah.
I can imagine Brownlee would defend that by saying that he's got to deal with taxpayer dollars, though.
Yeah, and it's really important to be careful with taxpayer dollars. But you've got to ask the question, what is EQC for? It's not there to run at a profit or to have budgetary constraints. It's there to do what the Act says, and the Act says it's to compensate people on the basis of reinstatement as set out in the Act where they've suffered earthquake damage. And look, that hasn't happened. There has been a niggly, penny-pinching approach, and time and again I see where EQC has made ridiculous assessments, and you have to go back, get professional advice at considerable expense to the homeowner, and the errors are manifest.
The young lady on Third Degree last night, Kettle, that's an employment investigation underway, so I imagine they can't comment. But after seeing what you saw, the perceived nepotism, the perceived young people with lack of experience getting these six-figure salaries.
Yeah, look, what it really shows is this. It shows that EQC was entirely unprepared. So we've got an earthquake commission in an earthquake-prone country which should be ready to leap into action when the expected big one hits. And we all knew that a big one was going to hit. It simply was unprepared. It had no resources, it had no plan in place. And this is the very organisation which, as its name suggests, is there for earthquakes. Would
you support some kind of independent inquiry that looks at the entire system that is EQC?
Yeah, look, and more than that, because the suggestion of a Royal Commission isn't just to look at EQC, because the other problem is that EQC did not interface well with other organisations. So EQC needs a really good relationship with the insurers it works with, it needed a good relationship with the City Council, and the whole thing didn't work. So, look, it's easy to be negative about it, but looking forward, this will happen again. And if the same system is in place when it does happen again, it will be another disaster, and there will be hundreds of thousands of people who are cast into misery again.
I asked Prime Minister John Key, who was on this program last week, whether he believed an independent inquiry looking at EQC was needed. He said no, because there continues to be ongoing dialogue about EQC anyway. What's your response to that?
Oh, it's utterly wrong, because again, if we take a positive approach, it's not just about looking for unhappy customers. It's about looking at the system and saying, did it work? What was wrong with it? What can we fix? How can we make it better for next time? And only then will you have a system which we know is robust and prepared.
But then again, though, others would suggest, though, what's the point of having another report or an inquiry into this organisation when you and I both know the flaws already? Though, are we just?
Oh, no, I don't.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see exactly what you're saying, but I think we've got to accept that it is a highly complex task and a highly complex organisation and interface with other organisations. And look, if we build a house poorly, we want to find out what went wrong. This house is built very poorly.
But what I'm saying is, don't we already know what's gone wrong, though?
No, we don't. No, I don't think we do. I think we've got to look much more. And what we know are the symptoms. We know that houses are not being repaired well. We know that there's accusations of nepotism and that there are suggestions of an integrity problem. But why did that happen? How did that happen? How can we avoid it next time? I think we need to delve a lot deeper.
You see, Ian Simpson would say, when it comes to the nepotism allegation, it's a small country. What do you make of that comment?
Oh, utterly wrong. And I think that we've got to be really careful that if we stick our hands up and say, oh, there's a conflict of interest, that doesn't cure the conflict of interest. It doesn't mean you can continue to hand out jobs to family and friends. What it means is there's a problem and we want to think very carefully about whether or not we go down that road. Now, I don't accept for one moment that because we're a small country, we can dilute the integrity that we need in our government departments.
What do you make of EQC employing this new dream team of 35 people to look at repairs? Too little, too late, or is it a start in the right direction?
Well, look, sure, it's a start in the right direction. There are defective repairs, and we need to get on top of that. It's a really important point. But it's, again, that's looking backwards, not forwards. My view is that, yes, we need to address those repair issues, but at the same time, we need to be saying, let's fix this organisation so that in future it will be robust and be able to protect people from the kind of disaster that struck Christchurch.
Over 100 or so residents have written to EQC wanting to sort out the interpretation that EQC has given them.
Yes.
Is that tit for tat, or is that genuine concerns?
Oh no, there's a real issue. I mean, and I'm fully...
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the EQC Act has two clauses in it which are perhaps have a little bit of tension. One says that it's a reinstatement to an as-new provision, and then tucked away in the schedule to the Act it talks about only having to reinstate reasonably and sufficiently and not exactly. So EQC looks to
not
the
exactly.
latter,
That's interesting.
not exactly, and says, look, it's essentially we think this is a reasonable and sufficient repair, whereas of course the homeowner latches onto the as-new and says, well, we think it should be as-new, and reasonable and sufficient is really only a very small carve-out from that. So there is a lot of tension in there, and my view is that the words of the Act itself, rather than the schedule to the Act, should prevail. But that's the Anthony Harper action, and Peter Woods is doing a great job there. It's a question that should have been answered years ago. It's so sad it's only being answered now.
You still, to this very day, are representing those who are going through hell with EQC.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we saw that on the television program the other night. We see it all the time, that there are people who still haven't resolved their claims with EQC. They're having yet another assessment, and it's frightening that people can get these assessments and find that when their insurer looks at it, it's a rebuild, but EQC thought it was under the $100,000 cap.
How can two agencies have such skew-if results?
Yeah, look, I'm not an engineer, but it beggars belief.
So where to from here then? What do you see as being the next vital step? I mean, as I've said to you before, Jerry Brownlee issued a statement saying there is absolutely no need for a review. The Prime Minister on this programme said last week a review's not going to happen. Is this something eventually down the track you think that it will happen when the dust so-called settles, if it does settle? And
look,
if so,
there must be a review of how the government agencies responded to this disaster to make sure that it works better in future, because let's be frank, it didn't work. You look around Christchurch today, you look not only at the broken homes, but all the broken people as well, and that's not acceptable. So we've got to make sure it doesn't happen again elsewhere.
do you think it could happen again elsewhere? I mean, you've got the Wellington Fault, for example.
Oh, that's right. Look,
You know?
and we know we're a disaster-prone country. We've got massive flood risks, we've got earthquake risks in Wellington, and we've got volcano risks in Auckland. Now, we put our head in the sand in respect of earthquake risk in Christchurch. We've got to make sure we don't do that again.
I want to quote Ian in something that I found interesting, and I can't stand this word either, stakeholder or engagement. It's almost as bad as resilient. But you said, in defending its position, EQC engages in bureaucratic communications nonsense. Case in point, its stakeholder engagements report. What on earth is stakeholder engagement reports? I would imagine a stakeholder is what, the customer? The client? Who?
Well, you'd think so, but no. In fact, what EQC appears to have done, and I looked very carefully through EQC's reports to see what they said about themselves, and quite frankly, even their own reports are very unflattering. But they were going to people who they were dealing with, such as Fletchers, such as Thornton Tomasetti, their engineers, and asking, how do you think we're doing? Now, they went to 70 people. I think they got about 35 replies. And even then, what that report showed was, however you dressed it up, EQC wasn't trusted. And if I can say, that is the most important thing here, that a critical government agency is not trusted by the citizens it deals with and by the people it deals with. Now, that's a fundamental breakdown, and something needs to be done about that, because if people don't trust an agency, it can't possibly work.
If this television program, Duncan Webb, was a national program, and you've got people sitting in their homes watching this from Auckland, or even perhaps more importantly, Wellington, what would you say to them when it comes to EQC?
I'd say I'm very sorry, actually, at the moment. I'd say I'm very sorry, but if this happens to you, there's no appearance that you're going to be treated any differently. There's no appearance that EQC has learned its lesson. There's no appearance there has been systemic change. And that's a real problem, because if it does happen to Wellington or Auckland or anywhere else, then there's going to be the same misery, the same delays, the same obstructions to people getting back into their homes and fixing up their houses as there has been in Christchurch. And that's a real tragedy, and it doesn't need to happen.
Finally, look into your crystal ball. Let me know, tell me, when will all these EQC and insurance issues be absolutely 100% resolved in this city of Christchurch?
I think, to be brutally honest, I think it'll be 20 years. There will still be people who have problems 20 years on, because only then will we be seeing the true fallout from some of the defective repairs that have been happening. Now, there's limitation problems, but nevertheless, I think that in terms of the actual human cost, it'll be a long, long time.
Duncan Webb, appreciate your time tonight.
Hey, it's
Thanks
great
for coming on
to
the
be here.
program. And that is our show tonight. To comment on today's program, feel free to email me, just chris@newstalkzb.co.nz. To make a comment on tonight's program on Facebook, feel free to go to facebook.com/lynchnz. Well, I think Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell has returned from her trip to China. If she, what's she doing over there? Who would know? So we'll find out if she is or if she is back on tomorrow's show on News Talk ZB. But from everyone here on the Lynched team, thanks for watching and have a good night.